For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I think it's safe to say that you want a coach who believes in his team and believes in the ability of his players. Does that mean blind optimism? Does that mean believing in your players so much that you refuse to make adjustments and just hope for the best? Of course not, but at a bare minimum, it means that you go into a game believing that if you execute the game plan and you do what you're supposed to do, that you have a chance at winning. At a bare minimum, the last thing I want to hear any coach say before a game is to hear them pulling a reverse Joe Namath and guaranteeing a loss. Can you imagine if a coach did that and put his team on blast before the game even started? And not in a reverse psychology sort of way, but because he genuinely thought that his guys had no chance at winning? Seriously, imagine Doug Peterson saying before a Jaguars game, I think we're going to lose this one by 5 scores. I have no faith in our guys. Imagine Mike Tomlin saying before a Steelers game, I'll be impressed if we can score a single point. That's how much we stink, and that's how good the other team is. Something like that would seem too absurd to believe, would seem straight out of a comedy skit, and would get a coach canned on the spot, leading to a locker room revolt of sorts. Well, as absurd as this might seem to believe, that's exactly what happened with the man we've been watching this whole time, San Francisco 49ers head coach Jack Christiansen. As a player, Christensen was one of the best to ever do it. He was named an AP first-team All-Pro 6 straight seasons from 1952 to 57, and he led the league in interceptions twice, including 12 picks during the 1953 season, which is the 5th most in a single season in NFL history. He led the Detroit Lions to 3 NFL championship wins, made it onto the All-1950s team, and got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1970, and rightfully so, as one of the greatest defensive backs in the history of the sport. But as a coach, yeah, he was not that good. Christensen had his flaws as the man in charge of the entire operation. I'll just put it like that. And if his 26 wins in 67 games isn't enough evidence of that, then maybe this bizarre incident will be too. Because I know I'd love to play for a coach like this, I really would. Because in 1966, prior to a game against the Green Bay Packers, Jack Christiansen, in what was not a motivational tactic or an example of reverse psychology or anything of the like, genuinely told the press that he thought his team was going to lose and get blown out. And this is the story behind the head coach who refused to believe in his team, and the most hopeless coach in the history of the San Francisco 49ers franchise. Before I talk about the comments made by Jack Christiansen and how the game itself went, we need some context to understand not just how bad the 49ers were playing before this game, but how good their opponent was playing, so we can truly understand the scope of the matchup at hand. We were 3 games into the 1966 season for the main team in our story, the San Francisco 49ers, and as you're probably able to tell from these lowlights, they were not that good at playing football. The 1966 season was, by far, the hardest season in NFL history to make it into the playoffs. There were 15 teams fighting for 2 spots, so you had no room whatsoever for error. If you dropped even so much as 2 games, you were already on thin ice. Well, 3 games into 1966, and the 49ers, after a poor preseason, were looking like one of the worst teams in all of football, as they sat near the bottom of the standings with an 0-2-1 record. After tying the Minnesota Vikings in their first game, completely blowing a second-half lead, the 49ers followed it up with back-to-back losses against teams in their own conference, losing 36-14 in a blowout to the Baltimore Colts, and losing 34-3 in a blowout to the Los Angeles Rams. That Rams game in particular was ugly with a capital U, as you can probably expect a 31-point loss to be. Starting quarterback John Brodie, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, went 11 for 31, completing just 35% of his passes with no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and a passer rating of 10.6, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play, as the 49ers turned it over a whopping 5 times. Entering the game at hand, the Niners were one of just 4 teams without a win under their belt, and their point differential of -53 was the 3rd worst in football, only better than the expansion Atlanta Falcons and the woefully inept New York Giants. The 49ers had not made the playoffs since 1957, nearly a decade ago, and safe to say, even though we were just a few games into the season, it was looking like that streak of ineptitude was going to continue. And now, after those 3 straight games without a win, the opponent that the 49ers were set to face? Well, that was this team right here, the mighty Green Bay Packers. I don't need to tell you too much about how good the Packers were back in the 1960s under Vince Lombardi, because we all know that they were really freaking good. And after winning the NFL championship in 1965, it seemed as though to start off the 1966 season, they were picking up right where they left off. Entering their game against San Francisco, the Packers were atop the West by a game, leading it with a perfectly unblemished 4-0 record. Green Bay allowed just 50 points across their first 4 games, allowing just 12.5 points per game, which was the 2nd best average in football at the time. And their point differential of +42 was the top total in the conference. They were good offensively, and they were good defensively. Dating back to the end of the 1964 season, including the playoffs, the Packers had lost just 3 of their last 24 games. And with the talent they had on that team, with Hall of Famers everywhere you looked, it's not too hard to see why. And after the Packers started the season off scoring 20 or more points in each of their first 4 games, including their most recent outing, a 23-14 win against the Detroit Lions, everyone thought that Green Bay was going to cruise to their 5th straight win to start the year off. They were 14-point favorites. They were playing a slumping San Francisco team, and they had lost just 2 of the last 14 meetings against the 49ers. Vince Lombardi had this team's number. No one, and I mean no one, was giving this team right here, the San Francisco 49ers, a chance in the world to beat the Packers. And that included none other than San Francisco's own head coach, Jack Christiansen. Because let's talk about the 49ers. We've already established that they were a bad football team to start the year off. And if you didn't know it, oh, don't you worry, because Jack Christiansen was there to remind you just how bad they were. It seemed as though Christensen was brought on this planet to remind us of one thing and one thing only, and that was that the 49ers were bad. It was basically the Les Steckel thank you for your service military references on steroids. After their draw against the Minnesota Vikings, he criticized Vikings head coach Norm Van Brocklin for saying that this team was a championship contender, saying, "Heavens no, I don't look at us that way." Way to take a compliment and just throw it on the ground Lonely Island style. After a loss to the Los Angeles Rams, as in their most recent game before the Packer game, Christensen took to the podium in the post-game press conference and said, "I have just one thing to say. We stunk the joint out from start to finish." And that's it. Then, he left the post-game press conference without saying anything else or without answering any questions. He made that 19-word remark and stormed out, to the point where afterwards, Christensen was reprimanded by the NFL, because apparently, it's not good for the league to have a coach who refuses to answer questions and who will just show up to a press conference for all of 5 seconds and then storm out. And heck, this isn't even the first time that I've done a video about Jack Christiansen during the 1966 season having no faith in his team to win a game, as he spoke negatively about his squad prior to their loss against the Baltimore Colts, where he said that the Colts wouldn't lose a game, their offense is too good, and they're scared to death of them. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Basically, Jack Christiansen reminded people that the 49ers were a bad team, as much as someone trying to be quirky reminds you that they're not like everyone else. You get the idea. Christensen already had no faith in his 49ers to be any good. So you can imagine what he must have been thinking in terms of preparing for the game against the Green Bay Packers. How would this team right here, this absolutely terrible team that seemingly can't do anything right, somehow beat the best team in football and the most formidable team of the entire 1960s with arguably the greatest coach and the greatest roster of all time? Well, in the eyes of Jack Christiansen, you don't. The 49ers had no chance at winning the game. And I don't mean that they had to play a perfect game and hope for the best, and I don't mean that they had to capitalize on Green Bay mistakes. I mean that they, quite simply, had no chance to win the game. When Christensen was asked in the week leading up to the Packer game about what he expected, he said that he expected to lose by 40 points. I kid you not, he expected to lose the game by 6 possessions. He then added, "The way things are going these days, I'd even settle for the so-and-sos not showing up and a 1-0 win on a forfeit." That's right. He told a group of reporters, completely seriously, and without any hint of sarcasm or reverse psychology whatsoever, that his team was going to lose by 40, and the only chance they had at winning was if the Packers forfeited, whether it was through a plane crash, or the bus getting lost from the hotel on the way to the stadium, or a marching accident or something. I don't know. His team had no chance whatsoever. And again, it'd be one thing if this was clearly said in jest, or if this was clearly a sarcastic remark. But it wasn't. Based on Christensen's previous comments, based on his tone as reported on through eyewitness accounts of the time, and based on his refusal to say anything else, he genuinely was out there guaranteeing that his team was going to lose the game. He was the anti-Herm Edwards, if you will. And it would be one thing if this was some bizarre attempt at reverse psychology, where you unite your own players into having a common enemy, which is you, as if to make your team believe in itself because they have no one else to rely on. But no, Christensen meant every single word that he said in the press conference to reporters. Now, there is some ambiguity in the words that he said, whether he meant that the 49ers were going to lose by 40 points, or whether he needed his blood pressure to increase by 40 points, because there was so much bleeding going on. Either interpretation is pretty bad, and whatever interpretation you want to use, it's very clear what Jack Christiansen meant when he was talking about his team and their chances against the Green Bay Packers, which is to say, they had none, especially with that forfeit comment. I mean, barring a forfeit by some act of God, they had no chance whatsoever. On October 9th, 1966, when the winless 49ers were going to take on the undefeated Packers, it was going to be an awful game. It was going to be a bloodbath, which is why it's going to come as no surprise whatsoever when I say that when the two teams took the field, and the 49ers, as in the team that had a coach who had no faith in anyone to do anything, played the mighty Packers, the San Francisco 49ers ended up winning the game 21-20 and pulling off the Wait, what? They did what? They did what? That was not in the script. That was not supposed to happen. Am I being punked right now? Editor, am I being punked right now? You're telling me that the 49ers, despite everything I just said, actually beat the Packers? Okay then. I'm in awe, but okay. That's what we're going with here. Yeah, despite everything about Jack Christiansen having no faith in his team, hoping the Packers forfeited, and saying that his team was going to lose by 40, sure enough, the 49ers actually won the game by a final score of 21-20. The 49ers won the turnover battle, committed fewer penalties than the Packers did, and were extremely efficient and effective on the ground, running the ball 30 times for 154 yards and averaging well over 5 yards per carry. Considering the fact that the Packers had one of the best run defenses in football in just about every single metric, and they ended the season with the #1 defense in football in points allowed, that's extremely impressive. And the crazy part about this game, as if it wasn't crazy enough already, was the fact that the Niners seemed to be in control the entire time. This wasn't a fluke. The 49ers played legitimately good football. They led at the halftime break. They had some really good drives. They never relinquished control of the lead in the second half. And they thoroughly deserved the win. This was an incredible performance by the 49ers, and I don't think Jack Christiansen was saying afterwards that his team stunk up the joint like they did last week. I think he was quite pleased with the win, especially considering the fact that based on his words and based on his actions, he definitely didn't see it coming. I've talked about coaches before outright saying that their team had no chance at winning the game. You can learn more about a bizarre instance of that happening in the 1970s with Tommy Prothro and the San Diego Chargers prior to a game against the vaunted Pittsburgh Steelers by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But this was one of those rare times where a coach said something like this, genuinely believed it, and the coach was actually proven to be wrong, and his team won the game in spite of him and his belief system. So what's the moral of the story here? I guess, in a weird way, it's to always have faith in your team, especially if you're the man in charge and you have the power to change things. Again, blind optimism and stubbornness is never encouraged, but at the very least, you should believe enough in your guys that they can get the job done. Otherwise, what are you doing? What's your purpose? It feels bizarre and downright awkward that Jack Christiansen didn't win a lot of games as a head coach, and yet, the one game he did win, and what many consider to be the signature and defining win of his career, was a game in which he outright admitted that he thought his team was going to lose by 40 points, and where he hoped something happened with Green Bay's planes so that they forfeited. But that's why they play the game. That's why any given Sunday is a thing. Because sometimes, a team has a way of surprising everyone, from the Vegas odds makers, to the fans, to the experts, to, in this strange case, even their own head coach. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.